There's heroes and there's legends. Heroes get remembered, but legends never die.
It's the Sitting Sportside podcast, exclusively on 1045theteam.com.
Oh, no! Because there's no crying in baseball. There's no crying in baseball! No crying!
You know what that music means? It's the Sittin Sportside podcast. Baseball previews are starting, and for the first time, didn't do it last year. I'm going to give you my fantasy baseball ranking, some players to take, to look at, and it's really going to be more about value more than anything else. And then the previews are coming soon. Finally having these players decide where they're going. Mike Moustakas, a heck of a pay cut if he had just accepted that qualifying offer, $11 million less to stay in Kansas City. And then Jake Arrieta finally signed with the Phillies. Lance Lynn, at the time of this podcast, just signed with the Twins. Alex Cobb still out there. Could be signed by the time you listen to this podcast, but more than I think at this point I'm satisfied with how many players are finally on a team to do my our division previews, which will begin sometime later this week. But today's podcast is all about what you can get in your fantasy baseball drafts. My plan for all these podcasts is to keep them 20 minutes or less. But as you can see, it may or may not be more. I'm going to guess that a lot of these are going to get close to 25 minutes. And so hopefully you can stick around and listen to the entirety of this podcast, or for the other ones, just to hear what I think about your team. I'm going to try to do as much positives. Beginning of the podcast, no crying in baseball. Don't cry to me. But if you want to cry to me, I really don't care. At EricH1045, come at me, tell me why I'm wrong or why you agree with me on the division previews. But today, it's all about who you want to draft in your drafts, and whether you want to complain to me about whether, hey, thanks for letting me draft this guy, or you can take all the credit. I really don't care. And then come at me and say, hey, this guy was a complete bust. In which case, you know, what are you going to do? I told you to draft him, and I'll probably have to take it, the consequences. I'm going to go position by position down the line. I'm going to give you a player that you can take after the top 100. So we're looking at, players that you can wait to get, and then I'm going to give you a couple names that might be free agent pickups for you, or players if you really wait on that position that you can get later. Now, some positions are more than others. I think catcher is a tough position to draft. The player I give you to pick up might not necessarily have it this year, so make sure to adjust to your drafts accordingly based on what your beliefs are on these players, and take my advice just to get some namesake on some of these players. I'm going to start with first baseman, go down the infield, end with catcher at position, and then get into pitchers. For starting pitchers, I'll probably give you about 3 outside the top 100, and then 3 plus there. So only about 6 pitchers who are just starting. So while I'm babbling, might as well just go right on to it and start with the first baseman, a guy who's going in about the 150 range so far in terms of first baseman that I'm very shocked about. Is a guy named Josh Bell, first baseman for the Pittsburgh Pirates. And I get that the lineup's going down, McCutcheon's gone. So a lot of Pittsburgh, I'm not sure how good they're going to be this season, and you can check that out, where I think I placed them in the NL Central. But a guy hit over 20 home runs last year, drove in 90 runs, 26 home runs, 90 RBIs, and he still batted in the 250s. This is a guy, especially in points leagues, you're going to be willing to get. He's kind of like Carlos Santana type that is probably more valuable in points leagues. But even in category leagues, you can go out and get this guy who's going to hit 20-plus home runs and drive in runs, and he's going to hit 3 or 4 the entire season. He just hasn't gotten the hype. Like, the hype was there for him, but he hasn't gotten the respect that he deserves after coming up. Greg Bird, though, right behind him as the New York Yankees. I get there's kind of concern of, he might not even be able to drive in as many runs as guys like Stanton and Judge. I get that, but he's right behind them at around 152 that he can also get. Players you might want to pick up and go to from here in terms of first baseman, there's 2 that I really like, and only one of them probably is worth to draft. The one that is worth drafting is Ryan McMahon. He's mashed the minor leagues for Colorado. We all know we like drafting people who played in Colorado, or who are going to play in Colorado, excuse me. And so when I look at a guy like Ryan McMahon, he's going to be in a great lineup in Colorado with the thin air. And I think that he's going to do what Mark Reynolds kind of did last year, just in a lesser-known role, and you can get him easily outside of the 250 late in your drafts, or maybe even pick him up. The other guy you might be able to pick up in mid-season that I do like is Dom Smith. Keep your eye on Dom Smith of the New York Mets. If Adrian Gonzalez is hitting really well, then there is that chance that he never sees the light of day and only comes up as a pinch hitter late in the year if they're a guy who's might platoon a little bit there. If their Mets are competing for the playoff spot. That being said, I still think if you're looking at the Mets and Adrian Gonzalez is struggling, Dom Smith might get the opportunity to play every day. And I think that at this point, he dropped a ton of weight. So anyone who had concerns about his weight, he dropped all of that weight. He mashed in the minor leagues. I think people kind of forget how well he hit in the minor leagues last year after coming up and only hitting in the 190s. So he's got the power. I think he's just a guy that you might be able to get midseason and really help you. So keep your eye on him. Now, guys, in the second base position, we're going right into second base. The guy that's falling outside of the top 100 at 157 that I'd love, just absolutely adore that you can get. His name is Ozzie Albies. He's on the Atlanta Braves, part of that young core, and he came up last year for about a month and a half-ish, I think. I want to say maybe a little bit more than that. He batted 286, 6 home runs, 28 RBIs, with 8 stolen bases. I think you're looking at 30-plus stolen bases. The pop could get you 10-plus home runs. I'm not sure how the RBIs are, but the runs scored because of the stolen bases and getting on base, I think he could hit over 300. I'll put him at like 285, and I think he could score over 80 runs. So give me Ozzie Albies as my guy in the 150 range with Ian Happ. If he gets the starting center field job and he's second base eligible, go for him as well around that same area. Ian Kinsler can have a back year for the Angels as well. Guys you can get really, really late or a pickup. I think early season, easily for me, it's Brandon Drury. I think he could have a really large impact for the New York Yankees at the bottom of that lineup and really kind of be a sneaky option late in drafts and whatnot. So he's my guy right now. You can easily pick up and plug him into your lineups that I could see really doing a good job as the Yankees fill in until Torres is ready. And in which case it kind of turns into, if he is that good early on in the season, I think you're looking at maybe a hot April and a hot May, and then he struggles in June, and then he might lose his position, or maybe an injury goes down and he just never comes back. That might be what the Brandon Drury product looks this season. So that's why I like him early on. He could possibly last the rest of the season. It really could. But then there is that the prospect threat. But the prospect threat, obviously Torres, would be your backup option if you have room for him, or if you get the jump on other teams. But another prospect threat is Scott Kingery, staying in the NL East. The second base prospect for Philly. I think Philly is going to trade Cesar Hernandez at some point this year, opening it up. He's having a great spring training. He's hit home runs left and right in spring training. We know that usually translates, at least at some point in their careers. So I think Sean Kingery is a big guy to look out for midseason. Very similar to Dom Smith in the fact that he's not going to come out of spring training as a starting second baseman for the Philadelphia Phillies, and he's probably going to have to earn it in the minor leagues. If he's hot, then eventually he might come up in June to take that position. So give me Scott Kingery as a guy to look for midseason as a pickup, and maybe if you have a room to stash him, that could be a late round draft pick if you're willing to do that. Third baseman, going outside of the top 100 that I do like. I'm going to give you a couple names right now that are not. I'm not going to pick them, but they're going in the 130 to 163 range. And that's Adrian Beltre, Jake Lamb, and Evan Longoria. If you wait to that area and you're being able to get those players there, I really like it. I think Longoria is going to have a resurgence. Not that he did terrible last year for Tampa Bay, but going to a San Francisco team that I think is going to be really competitive. I think he'll go right where his numbers were last year, 20 home runs, 86 RBIs, and it might even get a spike in those as well, playing for a good lineup. I think it's going to be a bounce-back team and a good lineup this year. Now, the guy I'm going to go with as the really big value guy in terms, and it's, I'm going to say Matt Chapman. I was in between Eugenio Suarez and Matt Chapman, but give me Matt Chapman. The guy came up last year, and he's not going to hit. So if you're in need for average for the third base position that you didn't go for average in a lot of your other positions and you're late in this draft, don't go for Chapman. Go for Eugenio Suarez. even though his average isn't necessarily going to be that much better, probably 30 points better than Chapman's. But if you want some power late in the draft and you can get from the third base position similar, then go with Matt Chapman. I mean, the guy hit 14 home runs in limited action last season. I think he can double that, maybe a 28 this year, around 80 RBIs for an underrated Oakland Athletic offense. I think the guy getting a lot of attention is the other Matt Olson, the first base prospect who came up and kind of did Rhys Hoskins type things last year under the radar because of how good Rhys Hoskins was for the Philadelphia Phillies. Chapman, with the trade of Ryan Healy, opens up an everyday position at third base. I really do believe that he could have an amazing season, but I'm going to temper my expectations. Like I said, I'm going to say 25 to 28 home runs, which is really good. So go for Matt Chapman late in your drafts. A couple players that you can get late at the third base position. A guy I absolutely love that you can get really late and maybe even pick up. I don't know how your league's going to look at it. Yeimer Candelario. And I hope I'm pronouncing that right. He went from Chicago Cubs to the Detroit Tigers last year in the Justin Wilson trade. Came up and he hit 3 home runs. Batted 283, 16 RBIs, in very limited action for Detroit. Scored 18 runs as well. So, in that limited action, those are some pretty good numbers in just what was just for the Detroit Tigers last year. Well, in total, it was 38 games. So Detroit only played 27. So, look for him to everyday third base job there in Detroit. They're moving Castellanos, who will probably still be eligible at third base, but they're moving him to the outfield. So, I really love what he can do. A guy who could maybe pick up, who might take Suarez's job. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe he'll play elsewhere in the infield. Is Nick Senzel from Cincinnati. So he's a kind of an Alex Bregman type. Drafted second overall a couple years ago and has done really good in the minor leagues. So he'll be eligible at third base. He could be a midseason pickup. So keep your eye and your watch list. All you have to do is click a tab for your watch list in your leagues. Nick Senzel of the Cincinnati Reds, as well as Yeimer Candelario, who I think will be right away a great option at third base for the Detroit Tigers. Moving on to shortstop, guy you can get outside of the top 100 that is worth drafting and have a big year. Points leagues, I'm all over Andrelton Simmons, and even in category leagues, I would definitely have my eye on him. He had a really good year last year, one of the biggest bright spots for a Los Angeles team that just, without Mike Trout, when Mike Trout was not healthy, he really stepped up and batted to the 270s. That's right where you expect Andrelton Simmons to bat. And he actually had some pop, 14 home runs, and he stole 19 bases. I think you're right around there. If you need average, Simmons is going to get it for you. And points, like I said, he'll get you singles. He'll get you points in terms of walks and hits. Those are 1 point, and he doesn't strike out a lot. So for points leagues, that's big. He doesn't strike out a ton. But the guy I'm going to go with for category leagues is probably Brandon Crawford. I think you look at his season last year, nothing to write home about, but he's coming off a down year. He's being drafted after the 200s at about averaging a 205th pick. Last year, 14 home runs, 77 RBIs. Before that, he's been around there in the mid-80s, in the mid-teens to the 20s for the home runs, and he's batted 275 before. So I think his average could be a lot better this year, and he could also still hit 15 to 18 home runs from the shortstop position, which is huge, and could drive in runs, like I said, on a much improved San Francisco Giants team. So I like Brandon Crawford as your mid-round if you were looking for a shortstop. Late, you're looking at Gleyber Torres is a possibility. Like I said before, he's a shortstop eligible. Ahmed Rosario's a guy you can get late. Here's the guy to really keep your eye on, though, in terms of a shortstop prospect that you can pick up midseason. It could be huge for you, and that's Fernando Tatis Jr. from the San Diego Padres. I get that they just traded for Freddie Galvis, and shortstop position might be taken up and whatnot. They're not going to hold him down, I don't think. I think San Diego's going to compete a little bit this year and have the opportunity in June and July to say, hey, we want to compete. We want to actually try to make the playoffs this year, which will be tough. They have a really tough division. But I think they're going to be, with getting Hosmer, they're in it to win it. I think they're actually really going to be in it to win it this year. So if they're in the area to do it, and I think regardless, they're going to give Fernando Tatis a lot of at-bats from July moving forward. So if you're looking at June and July and you're willing to stash and wait for him to come up around those times, or if you get the jump on everybody hearing on Twitter or whatnot that he's coming up, Fernando Tatis Jr. is the guy you want. He's absolutely mashing it in spring training too, and so he's doing a really good job there at shortstop, and he's ranked very similarly to Freddie Galvis, which just puts you in that right position to say, hey, if I'm gonna take a guy like Simmons or Crawford late and they don't pan out, and I can get Tatis later on in the season to get my shortstop eligibility, or my shortstop or my second base in shortstop position, then I will definitely keep my eye on Fernando Tatis Jr. Now let's move on to before we go to outfield, I guess I will give you my catchers. And catchers, the value for catchers is interesting because you only have 3 catchers who are going in the top 100. So I'm going to give you my best post 175. That's post top 7 according to ESPN.com ADP. I'm going to tell you right now, I love 2 guys, and they're going really, really late. So I'm going to give you the one that's kind of mediocre right now, then I'll give you those other 2 guys. The mediocre one that I think that can easily have a bounce back year in Oakland, and maybe his ADP will go up since he just signed, it's Jonathan Lucroy. I mean, the guy in past years has been a huge offensive weapon. I know Oakland's not the best hitting park, and he's coming off of being able to be on Colorado for a long time and didn't really come through. In 46 games, he only hit 2 home runs in Colorado with 13 RBIs. Did bat .310, but the power numbers weren't there. But he's still a guy who was able to hit 13 to 18 home runs throughout his years in Milwaukee, drive in 70-plus runs a couple times. Actually only twice, including that year he went to Texas. So he's still a great option at the catching position. He bats high 200s, if not low 300s. So he's going to get you a good average from the catcher position, and to get that late is absolutely huge. He's going at the 12th catcher right now. I would guess that will spark up into the top 10s and still be around the 200 area. Regardless, he'll be post 150, so that's a good guy to look out for. The 2 that I love that are going to be late and possible pickup options, and it depends if they're eligible in your league. It looks like ESPN leagues he will not be. I know in my Yahoo league he is. That's Francisco Mejia. He will come up at some point, and probably because the Indians are going to want to get him in that lineup. I don't know whether they're going to be able to or not. From which position they're going to be able to do it. I don't think they're going to have him catch. Like, he's a Kyle Schwarber type that they don't necessarily want him to bend to be able to play the position. So he might not be available in your league as a catcher. So, but if he is, Francisco Mejia 100% will come up, and he could bat over 300 and really have some decent power numbers in a really good lineup, so he might be able to score and drive in a lot of runs for you. The guy that I love that is definitely catcher eligible in every single league and will probably win the job this year is Jorge Alfaro. And I know a lot of people are down on Alfaro. He came over in that deal a couple years ago from Phillies that was for Cole Hamels. Nick Williams was up last year. He was a good a surprise to some people and how many home runs he hit for Phillies down the stretch last year. Alfaro batted .318 in his limited playing time last year, 5 home runs and 14 RBIs. I think he's going to be able to get you 15 to 20 home runs from the catcher position, maybe drive in 65 runs with everyday playing time. That .318 average, I think it shows that he is a really good hitter, but it will probably come back down to earth around 270, maybe a little bit lower than that. But I think from where you're going to be able to draft him, which is post 250, 260s, he's a guy worth looking for. Maybe not even drafting the catcher to the last pick. He's a guy you probably can get unless other people are very bullish on him like I am. Let's move to the outfield position as we're getting late in this podcast. I'm going to give you 3 outfielders that you could get past the 100 mark that I really do like. Ender Inciarte, he's around 110 right now, so that's a guy you might have to boost on to draft a little bit higher than you might want to, but he's going outside of the top 100 as well. He batted really well last year for the Atlanta Braves at .304. He scores a lot of runs. He'll steal at least 18 for you. I'm going to say 18. And maybe he won't drive in a lot of runs, but he'll score a lot of runs for you. He scored 93 last season. Moving on, I'm going to give you a couple more past the 150 mark here. I know a lot of people are liking Ronald Acuna at 162, but why not just draft Kevin Kiermaier at 167? He's a guy that's going to get, as long as he stays healthy, I know that's a thing, but as long as he stays healthy, he's guaranteed to start center field all season, bat in the high 270s, maybe even 280s, steal at least 15 stolen bases for you, maybe even get the pop if he had 15 home runs last year. Might not drive in a lot of runs, but I think he's going to score up over 65 if he's 100% healthy, steal over 20 bases, and hit over, maybe even have a 20-20 season. That's how much I like Kevin Kiermaier. So he's a guy you can get lower than Ronald Acuna in drafts now, but he's guaranteed playing time, and he's actually shown he can do well in the major leagues. So Acuna's getting all the hype, but I've given you a lot of prospects, so you know how much I like these outfield the prospects, but But at the same time, I really think that Kevin Kiermaier is a guy that you'd probably be worthy, worth saying, you know what, I'll take Kiermaier, or I'll take Nomar Mazara 20 picks earlier, and not risk Acuna not even being up till June. So Acuna going at 162 is kind of big. Another guy that I like that goes right around the 200 mark is Stephen Piscotty in a bounce back year. At 9 home runs, 39 RBIs last year, but I think it could easily bounce back. He's closer to his mother in Oakland, who is sick, I believe, so that might help out his game mentally. Could have been a big detriment to him last year as well, to go along with that injury. She has ALS, so that's huge, and I think that could pay dividends in his game. And like I said, an underrated Oakland lineup. I do actually really like pass this and pickup batters, guys you can pick up. I really do like outfielders from Toronto. I think that if Curtis Granderson and Randall Grichuk do solidify their roles at left field and right field respectively, one, if not both, could have huge fantasy potential. And a park we've seen a lot of these players hit more home runs. And Justin Smoke, he was in Toronto for a good period of time and just put it together last year, but a lot of that has to do with the ballpark and how they can hit home runs out of there. We know Curtis Granderson can hit home runs. He's been a guy who's hit a lot of home runs. He hit 26 last year between New York Mets and the LA Dodgers. So if he's able to do that in Toronto, I think he could go over 30 home runs, if that power is still there. The average isn't great, but if you're looking for power late with that, really late, I'm talking really late, then I would go with Curtis Granderson. Another guy that I really like, though, from that outfield, Randall Grichuk. Part of that St. Louis mold, we've seen players go from St. Louis to Toronto before, Colby Rasmus. I think Grichuk is just kind of a guy that maybe got out of his own way over there now that he doesn't have a lot of expectations now going to Toronto. He's on a team that isn't necessarily expected to compete. St. Louis is expected to compete every single year by those fans. Great fans in Toronto. I guess passionate fans is the right word. I'm not sure they're great in terms of not throwing stuff on the field as we've seen in the past, but they're very passionate still in Toronto. But I still think they're not as, expectations aren't always as high. I think St. Louis has his major expectations, especially for a guy like Grichuk. So give me those two, along with Piscotty, right? Former St. Louis outfield. I like both of those guys. And another guy that I like, Lewis Brinson from Miami. Huge opportunity possibly in Miami now, coming over from the Christian Yelich deal in Milwaukee. He was also traded from Texas to Milwaukee, I believe, in the Jonathan Lucroy deal a couple of years ago. So he's a big part of this Miami rebuilding phase. He'll get a lot of at-bats. And trust me, I think he'll do a really good job. I think long-term he might be a better player than Christian Yelich. Once again, proven more than non-proven, right? And he struggled in the major leagues in his limited action. So to tread lightly, or tread wisely, the caution on Lewis Brinson, as well as Eloy Jimenez. I think he's the guy that's a big prospect. He went from Chicago, the north side of the south side, and now he's in the White Sox after their deal for Jose Quintana. Sent him to the Chicago Cubs. So Jimenez came over to the White Sox. He could be up mid-season. It could really give you massive numbers, over 300, and hit a lot of home runs. But that's a deep guy that you look at in July. So that's the one to look at in July. It's Eloy Jimenez, and I'd be hard-pressed not to end these hitters. And I know we're so far into this podcast now, but 20-some minutes. I know I'd be hard-pressed not to mention Willie Calhoun, who will be a outfielder and might be even second base eligible in your league for Texas Rangers. If he wins that job, I think that last job, I believe it's left field. If he wins it, he could easily hit over 20 home runs and have 70 RBIs and be a big-time 280-plus hitter for the Texas Rangers this year, and a great ballpark to hit from. So I know I just spent 20 minutes on hitters, and just because I'm going to spend here 5 minutes here on pitchers, and I hope I gave you enough names there, and I hope I gave you enough pitchers' names here, but I'm going to give you some pitchers that are going outside of the top 100, and I'm going to do a little more rapid fire, guys that I really like, and then maybe people that are pickup options later on. So from 100 on, I'm going to list out a couple here that I really do like. Trevor Bauer going 121. That's a huge guy. That's a huge get if you can work him off. Because he's a guy that everybody knows now. I mean, Drone Boy. He knows, him from the playoffs, but if he puts everything really together now, that curveball really comes to fruition, he could be the second best pitcher in their rotation. And passing Carlos Carrasco will be tough. Kluber's by far the number one, but if he really puts everything together, he could be the second best pitcher on the rotation. So definitely look for him. Luke Weaver and Lance McCullers Jr. and Zach Godley are going 132, 133, 134, respectively. McCullers is going to be the one that really pops out, being on the playoff team, the defending World Series champion Houston Astros. He has the best stuff out of those three, but I will not be disappointed if come around that area, I'm looking at those three and McCullers comes off the board first, because I'd be very happy going with Zach Godley, who has Corey Kluber upside. That's a big statement, but he has really good prospects to have another even better year after breaking out last year with a 3.37 ERA and 165 strikeouts. I think he can get close to 200 this year in the K department and still have a sub 3.5 ERA. As for Luke Weaver, I think you're looking at a guy who really showed what he could do down the stretch for St. Louis last year. He gets that rotation spot this year. You're looking at 175 strikeouts maybe in a 3.5 ERA. For McCullers, the strikeouts are even more tantalizing if he puts a whole season together. The problem is he gets injured. They might want to make sure he stays healthy if they're going to be another playoff. They're going to be in the playoffs again this year, so he might not be a guy that lasts down the stretch. I think he could be a guy that gets over a 4 ERA. It depends if we see first half McCullers or second half McCullers. So if you see a lot of the first half McCullers the whole year, he's a top 10 pitcher. But if we're not getting that, then if we're getting a mixture of both, or if we're getting more of the second half, I would actually take Godley and Weaver over Lance McCullers Jr. So caution there as well. Mike Fulmer, similar situation at 188. He's another guy that can give you really good numbers on a bad team. Not going to necessarily get you wins, but on a bad Detroit team, he'll get you really good numbers in terms. I think he could have a 3.25 ERA if he's really on top of his stuff this year and isn't too injured. But he could get injured. He could be injured, and you could lose him for the season, or he could really get in some bad ways. But he's a guy you can get 188 that I think is just as good as McCullers in terms of the prospects for the season. And then past that, going past the 200 phase. You're looking in the 200s. I'm looking at a lot, and I'm looking at King Felix. You can get at 218. That's the namesake. But would you really want him over a guy like Jameson Taillon? I don't know. I think I would probably go Jameson. I think he could really give you a really big year. He needs a bounce. He needs a bounce back from. I wouldn't say a bounce back for Taillon, because last year was really his first full year. Now that I think about it, which is pretty crazy. To think about, or it's his second full year, but it's pretty crazy to think of that. It's really only his second full year, and he kind of struggled there down the stretch. But I think that he's a guy who could come out and really put the rotation in Pittsburgh on his back now that he's the best one there for sure, now that Garrett Cole is gone. Another guy that I really like is go back-to-back around the 223, 224 range is Lucas Giolito and Dinelson Lamet from the White Sox and Padres, respectively. Lamet will probably have a low 4 ERA, maybe a high 3.8. That'd be best case scenario, but he'll get you a lot of strikeouts. I think you're looking at a guy who could get close to 200 strikeouts. And with Giolito, I'm not sure where his Ks are going to be this year. He was on and off last year. He can get you big Ks. He can also go 6 innings, shutout baseball with only 1 K, and then give up 7 runs, but with 8 Ks in 4 innings. So I don't know what Giolito we're going to get all the time, but all I know is last year for the White Sox, he really reversed his curse, so to speak, from his first year and went 3 and 3, 34 strikeouts and a 2.38 and a sub-1 whip. So he did really well for the White Sox down the stretch. He's worth trying in the early 200s, if not late 190s, if you really want to. I think he's could be better than a Marco Estrada or a Matt Harvey, who go a little bit higher, but he also could be worse. So that's why he is ranked where he is, but I really do like what he can give you at the 223 range. Now, here's some pickup guys that you can look at. Sean Newcomb, he was a pickup last year. I think he could be a guy that you want to pick up. Joe Musgrove came over in the Garrett Cole deal from Houston. He could have a really big season for Pittsburgh and moving to the National, and he could really help his ERA and his strikeout totals. So I would really look at him as a guy that to really scout and think about getting. The guy that really I think you should scout and wait to the June and July to do is, and he might even he's probably not going to make the team out of spring training, but there's talk that he might. I mean, because Bob Melvin didn't rule out that A.J. Puck, the former Florida standout, might make it out, and he's a lefty, a big lefty who can really work. He's not Chris Sale. He's not Chris Sale, but he can get you in a lot of ways with the slider, and I think that he's going to be a very good potential get in for you midseason if he comes up in an Oakland team. And it's a good ballpark to pitch in. Vince Velasquez, another guy who is, because of injury problems last year, is a guy you're going to be able to get and pick up possibly. So he could be a very valuable starter for a Philadelphia team that now that he'll be on probably going under the radar now because they have Arrieta. Closers, let's go quickly. I'm going to give you two big closers that you can look at. Brandon Morrow at 188 for the Chicago Cubs. Very good season last year, 2.06 ERA with a .92 whip for the LA Dodgers. He was overused in the playoffs, don't get me started about that, but he had a very good season. Now a closer in Chicago, a lot of opportunities to close. He's going at the 188 mark. If you need saves and you really screwed the pooch on that one and you waited that long to get a closer, going as the 19th closer, 100% give me Brandon Morrow. Get you at least, I don't want to say at least, but I think he'll give you 25 to 35 saves. And the ERA will be good, and the strikeout totals, not necessarily your Kenley Jansen's or your Craig Kimbrel's or your Aroldis Chapman's or your Dylan Betances or your Chad Greens, but he'll get you maybe 75, which is probably more around your Wade Davis's. So the other guy that I really like is Archie Bradley, and I know there's a lot of talk. He's going around the 200 range. He's the number 23 closer that's being drafted. There's talk that he might not even win the closing job. Tori Lovolo saying the competition for the closing roles between Brad Boxberger, and Yoshihisa Hirano, and it remains, quote, wide open. But 100% give me to Archie Bradley. Because he had 1.73 ERA with 79 strikeouts last year. He did pick up one save with a 1.04 whip. I really think that he's going to be not only the closer in Arizona, but a really darn good one, and a guy that might be worth owning in points leagues. I'm not necessarily sure he'd be worth owning in, and I mentioned a little earlier, in category leagues, because he's not going to get you saves at all. He might get you some wins, but is Chad Green. The guy is a strikeout machine, and his strikeout per 9 ratio is insane. So definitely go for Chad Green in a possible points league that you're really deep. You don't necessarily have to, or maybe you have to have a relief pitcher. So I think he's a guy definitely to look at. He'll get you a lot of points, but he's not going to get you saves, so it doesn't help you in category leagues. And then even a points league, it's not going to help you there either because he's not going to get you saves there either. So those are my sleepers or value picks in this year's draft. I hope you stayed all the way through. I hope that you use some of them, and I also hope that you really look evaluate it to your own strategy. I hope you put together a half hour to 45-minute plan, before the draft, or go through it for at least 15 minutes to think, okay, what do I want? Here, if you know your draft, pick ahead of time even more. Go through the rankings and see here who might be available and who I might be able to get here. It really helps your strategy just to know what you might be able to get at certain points in the draft. But still unpredictable. You don't know who's going to fall into your lap. That's 100% true. But if you can really just hunker down and really know who you're going to get going into it, and really have your own opinions with my opinion or someone like Tristan Cockcroft or Eric Karabell on ESPN.com. It's a great to have a balance. So use some of the players that I've said, but also use some of the players that I didn't say, or maybe players I didn't say and one that I didn't really like here. So there's a player you might like that I don't like, and that's how that works with the whole valuing and whatnot. But really have your own set of people, but also look and say, hey, you know what? Josh Bell, it might be really good, or Greg Bird might be really good, or maybe I will get Archie Bradley 20 plus, or So there's a lot to think about. So thank you for listening to the Sittin Sportside podcast right here on 104.5theteam.com. Division preview should be out soon. I'm Eric Hammond for the Sittin Sportside podcast.